The first Resident Evil game is one of the most iconic games of the 90s. A fun, simple story, 2 characters to play as with their own unique storylines, great enemy design, the list goes on. And how could we forget the voice acting? It's probably one of the most quotable video games out there.
Is that Jill?
Is that voice Enrico's?
Yeah?
The voice acting is very much a product of its time for a multitude of reasons. At a panel at Minneapolis in 2014, DC Douglas, the current voice actor for Wesker, had this to say. Think about Resident Evil 1. Think of Sergio Jones playing Albert Wesker in that one, and how everyone talks about how his performance was so horrible. You know what? He's a good actor. It sounds horrible because they probably had 300 lines on an Excel sheet and you have no idea about the context of the scene, so you just keep repeating the line. So it's like, open the door. Let's just do 3 different takes on that. Open the door. Open the door. Open the door. And then some Japanese engineer goes, I like the rhythm of that last one. Jonathan Klein, the English language producer for Street Fighter IV, elaborated on this idea. The Japanese will always pick what they think sounds good in their minds, not necessarily what sounds good to an English-speaking audience. But they started learning. They realised that, yes, people want good actors in their video games. Voice acting was still obviously a new thing in the video game industry in the mid-90s, and the standard that we have today just wasn't there. To add insult to injury, the translation of video games was not a massive priority for a lot of companies, so lots of localised games from Japan suffered from mediocre translations, which has led to more than a few iconic lines. So this got me wondering, how was the translation in Resident Evil? Could it be that a subpar translation of the game's dialogue is what led to the dramatic but entirely endearing voice acting from the first game? As a full-time weeb with an intense fondness for dorky voice acting like this, I made it my duty to hunt down both an English and Japanese copy of the game to do some in-depth comparisons of the dialogue, so we can all get to the bottom of this. So, let's jump in. Obviously, spoilers for this 20-year-old game are incoming, you have been warned. Let's start with Jill's route. Upon entering the mansion, Jill, Barry and Wesker have a brief conversation.
But Chris is...
What is it?
Maybe it's Chris. Now, Jill, can you go?
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know.
Okay, let me handle this.
Why does he say, let me handle this, when he just asked Jill to handle it? This is one of many scenes in this game where there's good reason to believe the translators did not have any access to the game while translating its script, and thus had no context. In Japanese, he says, では、私はここを確保しておく, which would translate more accurately as, alright, then I'll secure this area. This is completely lost in the translation, and the conversation ends up just sounding a bit disjointed as a result. After investigating the gunshot and finding their Bravo team comrade has been eaten by a zombie, Barry gives Jill a lockpick before they go their separate ways.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
In the Japanese script for the scene, Barry says, Kagiaki no tokui na omae ga motteru yo, which would translate literally into English as, the skilled at lockpicking you should take it with you. If they wanted to translate it more naturally, they could have gone with, since you're so good at lockpicking, you should take it with you. I know a lot of you are probably wondering about one very specific scene. You already know what it is. So Jill finds herself close to death. Barry comes along, saves the day, and drops this bombshell.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Surprisingly, the sentence is actually just as dorky in Japanese. The Japanese text says, サンドイッチが出来上がるところだったぜ, which translates to, you were almost turned into a sandwich. More or less the same as English. Nice to know they were going for that cheesy one-liner in both languages.
Yeah.
If you're playing Chris's scenario, this is around the same time you find Rebecca Chambers, the rookie member from STAR's Bravo team.
Are you the only person here from the Bravo team?
Well, because the helicopter made a forced landing, I just ran into this house anyway, but I
see. There's nothing else you could have done anyway. It's good you're here.
What's interesting is what Chris says in Japanese here is quite different. The text reads, 君の経験では無理もない。とにかく無事でよかった, which would translate as, that's natural given your experience. Anyway, it's good you're safe. It's interesting that he directly comments on her lack of experience in the Japanese text, but this is completely dropped in English. At one point during the game, Jill encounters Barry and he has something to give her.
Okay, let's separate again.
Just a moment. I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
But when you check it afterwards, he gave you ammo, not a weapon. Also, a weapon that's powerful against living things isn't much use to us in a house full of zombies. In the original Japanese text, he says, "Chotto shita tama da, ikimono ni yoku kiku ze." Tama means ammo in Japanese, so how this got translated as weapon, we will never know. Living things in the Japanese text reads as ikimono, which, yes, can mean living thing, but can also translate as creature, animal, basically anything that is sentient. While the zombies aren't living per se, they are indeed sentient. What he's actually saying here is that this powerful ammo is really effective against enemies, whether they're living or the undead. And he's right. While we're talking about the zombies, you might be curious as to how they're actually referred to in the Japanese text. They're called a variety of names in the Japanese version, and much like in English, they are never explicitly called zombies, but mostly kaibutsu, which literally means strange being or strange creature. There's also a handful of times that they are called bakemono, which also means creature, but has more of a nuance that the creature in question has undergone a transformation or metamorphosis of sorts. The choice to use both words was probably just stylistic, but some of you may find it to be an interesting detail. Next, let's talk about Richard. Oh boy, despite only being in the game for about 10 minutes, his dialogue always stood out to me as being particularly bad, and that's saying a lot.
Ouch! You're wounded! What kind of demon attacked you?
It was a huge snake, and also poisonous. Ugh.
Poisonous? Oh no. Richard, hold on!
This is another case of a translation that is far too literal, and it shows in the end result. Originally, he says, "Totetsu mo nai hebi da, shikamo dokuja to wa na." The sentence was translated word for word into English, and you can really tell once you put the two next to each other. Poor Richard never stood a chance. I was very excited to get to the iconic Itchy Tasty diary found in the game. For anyone not aware, you find the Keeper's diary in one of the bedrooms of the Spencer mansion and can slowly see the writer succumb to the virus as the diary entries go on. I was surprised to find that there are some translation errors here too. In the first entry, dated May 9th, 1998, it says, "At night, we played poker with Scott the guard, Alias, and Steve the researcher. Steve was really lucky, but I think he was cheating. What a scumbag." The first thing to note is the name Alias, which was sure to raise some eyebrows back in the day. Well, that's because it's a mistranslation. In the original Japanese text, the name is actually Elias. Also, in the Japanese text, it is made clear that both Scott and Elias, or Alias, are guards, whereas this is left vague in English. In a later entry dated May 14th, he says this: "When I woke up this morning, I found another blister on my foot. It was annoying and I ended up dragging my foot as I went to the dog's pen. They'd been quiet since morning, which is very unusual. I found that some of them had escaped. I'll be in real trouble if the higher-ups find out." In the original Japanese text, there's an extra line in the entry that is completely omitted in the translation. It says, "Meshi o mikka nuita kurai de nige agatte," which would roughly translate as, "Damn dogs ran away just because I didn't feed them for 3 days." It's also worth noting that the entry from May 15th, which mentions a character called Nancy, doesn't exist at all in the Japanese version, and was only added into the localization for some reason. This is the entry I'm talking about. May 15th, 1998. Even though I didn't feel well, I decided to go see Nancy. It's my first day off in a long time, but I was stopped by the guard on the way out. They say the company has ordered that no one leaves the grounds. I can't even make a phone call. What kind of joke is this? Interestingly, the fact this passage was only added into the Western version means Nancy doesn't technically exist whatsoever in the Japanese version of Resident Evil. One last funny thing about this diary. The final, infamous line when he says "itchy tasty" translates as "kayui umai" in Japanese. Well, it says "kayui uma" in the game, with the E being dropped to show the disease taking its toll on the writer, but "kayui uma" ends up translating as "itchy horse." I know this wasn't a translating error per se, it's just funny to see how it turned out. The Plan 42 report in the guardhouse has some lines missing as well. They read, "From what we've gathered from those who've survived, when its petals open and its inner parts are exposed, it becomes considerably more aggressive. According to one survivor, it's as if it's protecting something. There appears to be something more to this that we're missing, but ultimately, the nature of plants is not something us humans are able to comprehend." Later on, after fighting Plant 42 in the guardhouse and checking out the area, Barry and Jill share a short conversation.
Okay. I'm gonna stay in the soldiers' area and take a look around.
Wait, what? What on earth is a soldier's area? I thought I misheard this line at first, but I looked up a transcript of the game and that said the same, so I'm not alone. Weirdly, in the original dialogue, what he says is much more straightforward. Ore wa mou skoshi koko ni nokoru, or I'll stay here a little longer. If soldier's area is some phrase that I'm not aware of, please let me know in the comments, because how this got translated has me stumped. We've got another iconic line to look at. In Chris's story, killing Plant 42 is a little different. Instead of a straightforward fight, Rebecca uses the V-Jolt serum to poison Plant 42's roots, leaving Chris to finish the job. Afterwards, Chris drops an unexpected dad joke while the two are having a conversation.
Oh! I can't believe it! Are you okay?
Yeah, so much for him. We got to the root of the problem. Saved again.
Well, in Japanese, he doesn't make any kind of dad joke. He simply says, Yatsu wa kutabatta nekko o yararete na, mata tasukerareta na, which translates as, the dead roots are what did him in. You saved me once again. No dad joke to be seen. Bummer. Then, Rebecca finds a room fully stocked with medical supplies and offers to patch up Chris if he needs it.
This room is fully equipped with medical supplies. I can treat you, except for your major injury. Would you like me to?
The way she says it implies Chris has a particularly serious injury that needs seeing to, but this isn't the case in the game. Why didn't she say major injuries instead? Well, weirdly enough, she doesn't say either of these things in the original, instead just saying, Teate dekirun desu kedo, shimasu? I can treat you. Would you like me to? No mention of any specific injuries at all. Very strange. Here's another classic line. If you make it to the end of the game and let Rebecca die back in the mansion, the dialogue with Wesker at the end of the game is a little different.
You think you can disappear with such important material?
Would you like to see it? Come with me. I'm sorry for my lack of manners, but I'm not used to escorting men. Now, walk.
And this, everyone, is why translation is a fickle process. In Japanese, Wesker says, Ainiku danse o escorto shita koto wa nainda, which actually does translate as I'm not used to escorting men. However, the word escort in Japanese does not have the sexual connotation that it does in English. It simply means to accompany someone somewhere and nothing more. Either the translators weren't native English speakers, or this was just a very unfortunate oversight. While we're talking about Wesker's sex life, there's another interesting line if you save Rebecca this time and take down the tyrant.
Wow!
Ha! It seems like this bulletproof jacket is pretty strong.
I see.
How about Captain Wesker?
He is sleeping with the ultimate failure. Hurry up! I want to get out of here.
Wow, what were they thinking writing this line? So, in Japanese, he says, Kyūkyoku no dekisoku nai to onenne sa. Onenne means going to sleep, but has a very childlike nuance to it, kind of like saying going Betty Buys or nighty night. Obviously, Chris is saying it in a very degrading way here on purpose, but the fact they chose to translate it as sleeping with the ultimate failure turns it into a very different meaning in English. I never want that image in my head again, thank you Capcom. However, if you make it this far on Jill's route, she shares quite a long conversation with Wesker about his plans with Umbrella. What's interesting here is, in my opinion, Wesker comes across as a much more ruthless and cold-hearted villain in the Japanese text than he does in the translation. For example, during the exchange, he says this.
You're a brave girl, but if I were you, I wouldn't give up such a big discovery.
Whereas the Japanese text actually says something quite different. It reads, Jitsu ni isamashii ne, daga muimi na isamashi yo, which translates as, you truly are brave, but it's worthless, or in vain. Not too long after, Barry knocks Wesker out, and Barry then insists that they should investigate the tyrant that Wesker was talking about.
Well, he was talking about the world's most powerful biological weapon, called Tyrant or something, I think.
Do you think we could see Tyrant now?
Barry, you're so optimistic.
In Japanese, Jill says, Nani o nonki na koto o. The main culprit as to why this exchange is so odd in English is Jill's use of the word nonki in the original, which would translate on its own as carefree, easygoing, even optimistic. But what she's really trying to communicate here is something more along the lines of, why would you want to do something like that, Barry? Oh my god. While the poor translation makes the conversation seem almost comedic in English, in Japanese, Jill reacts much more surprised and uncertain of Barry's suggestion, as she should. Nani o nonki na koto o, which would most naturally be translated as, get your priorities straight, or now's not the time for that. Thank you to my friend Cookie on Fire for giving me some clarity on this one. And that's gonna do it for this video. Which mistranslation did you find the most interesting? If there's any other game with cringy dialogue that you'd like me to take a look at, let me know in the comments below. If you want to learn more about the actual actors and voice actors involved in this game, Wang did an excellent series of videos on the entire cast of the original Resident Evil, and I highly recommend you check those out. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.